Take off those rags." Mountain Man ordered the fat woman he bought, but what he did after shocked her. Turn her around. Let them see what kind of fat, useless debtor looks like. Cornelius Ashford's voice cracked through the frozen air like a whip. The square of ironwood was packed shoulder to shoulder, breath fogging in the bitter winter wind, boots grinding dirty snow into the wooden planks of the auction platform. At the center of it all, with wrists bound and ankles chained, stood Winifred Hawthorne. Winnie, 24 years old, barefoot on splintered boards, toes numb and bleeding where they dragged her through town. Her brown dress was nothing more than torn rags now, stained with mud and dried blood, clinging to the soft curves of her body. She tried to keep her chin up, but tears pushed past the veil of tangled red hair hanging over her cheeks. "Spin her," Cornelius ordered. The deputies jerked the chain. Winnie stumbled, forced to turn in a slow circle while 300 pairs of eyes crawled over her. Laughter followed like a wave. "Look at the size of her! Who'd pay for that hog? She'll eat more than she earns in a year." Each word landed like a slap. Winnie bit her lip hard enough to taste iron. She would not beg. Not for these people. Not after 6 months of doing laundry until her fingers bled, cooking in strangers' kitchens, scrubbing floors until her knees gave out, only to be told it was not enough to cover her dead father's debt. "Winifred Hawthorne," Cornelius announced, puffed up in his fine coat, gold watch chain glinting under the gray sky. "Owes the Ironwood Bank $800. Knows how to cook, sew, scrub, and lift more than most men here. Will start at $200. Silence. Winnie stared at the snow at her feet, praying someone, anyone, would see more than her body, that someone would look once at her eyes, not just her size. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. "Fine," Cornelius snapped. 150. A few men snorted. One spat. 100 then. That's less than a good mule. An old farmer lifted a shaky hand. $100. I'll put her with the pigs. She'll feel right at home. The square erupted in laughter. Winnie's vision blurred. Pigs. That was all she was worth to them. Less than the tools in their barns. Less than the boots on their feet. Cornelius raised his gavel. $100 once. Somewhere behind the crowd, a voice cut through the cold like a rifle shot. 500. The laughter died instantly. Heads turned, bodies shifted. A path opened as if the town itself was afraid to brush against the man striding through. He was tall, broader than any man on the platform. Dark hair, darker beard, a white scar slashing down one side of his face, eyes like winter steel fixed on only one thing, the girl in chains. For the first time that day, Winnie's breath caught for a reason that wasn't fear. And before we go any further, where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me in the comments below. Your stories travel farther than you think. Gideon Ironwood did not rush. He didn't need to. The crowd parted for him as if the cold itself moved out of his way. He stepped up onto the platform, boots thudding against the planks. Up close, he was even more terrifying. Broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy fur coat, forearms scarred, jaw set like carved granite. A man shaped by violence and wilderness, not by the softness of town living. But when his gaze fell on Winnie, something in the set of his face shifted. Not pity, not disgust. Something quieter, sadder. Cornelius cleared his throat nervously. "Ironwood? Surely you didn't mean 500? For her?" Gideon didn't even spare him a glance. He kept his eyes on Winnie as he spoke. I meant exactly what I said." Winnie's heart stuttered. She tried to meet his gaze but faltered, looking instead at the snow melting under her bare, bruised feet. Why? Why would a man like him spend so much on someone like her? No one ever had. Certainly not since her father died. Cornelius tried again, voice desperate to regain control. 500 is far above market value, particularly for... Gideon finally looked at him, just once. Cornelius's words strangled and died in his throat. The mountain man reached into his coat, pulled out a bundle of bills, and tossed them into Cornelius's trembling hands. "Count it." Cornelius did, fingers shaking. 500, yes. Gideon pulled out another stack, thicker, heavier, and dropped it on top. 300 more. Her debt is paid. Completely. The crowd gasped. No one paid a full $800, not even for a healthy young man, and certainly not for a girl the town mocked daily. Cornelius sputtered. You can't pay her debt and take her. That's not how... Gideon leaned in just enough for Cornelius to smell winter wind and gun oil. "She's free of her debt," Gideon said quietly, "but she's not free of what you've done to her." Cornelius flinched as though struck. Winnie swallowed hard, fear pressing tight in her throat. She shouldn't speak. She never spoke in front of crowds, but her voice slipped out, barely a whisper. Why are you doing this?" Her hair hid most of her face, but Gideon tilted his head slightly, studying her as though she were a puzzle only he recognized the shape of. "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago," he said, and something inside her broke. The deputies cut her chains by Gideon's order. She collapsed to her knees, legs too numb to hold her. He dropped to a crouch instantly, this wild, dangerous man, and lifted her gently by the arms. "Easy," he murmured. "Let me." No one had ever said those words to her. He took off his heavy fur coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, drowning her torn dress, drowning her bruises, drowning the shame that had clung to her for months. The warmth made her eyes burn. Gideon's voice dropped, low but steady. "No one touches her again." Not even a whisper rose from the crowd. He guided her down the steps as if she might shatter under his hands. And the truth was, she might. Winnie had been breaking slowly for months, years, if she were honest. Ever since poverty chased her father into the grave. Ever since Cornelius's men took everything she owned except the clothes on her back. Ever since the townsfolk started calling her the pig girl. "She's lucky," someone muttered. "Better than being sold to the old farmer." "No," another corrected. "She's lucky he didn't take her as punishment." Gideon heard every word. His jaw tensed, but he didn't turn. His focus stayed on the girl hobbling beside him. Once they reached the edge of the square, he stopped and knelt before her. The gesture shocked her, the idea of a man like him lowering himself at her feet. He gestured toward her raw, bleeding toes. "Who did this?" Her lips trembled. "Cornelius's deputies. They dragged me from the forge. I tried to tell them I would repay the debt. I just needed more time. But they laughed." Gideon's eyes darkened in a way that made her shiver for a different reason entirely. "You won't be dragged again," he said. Winnie's throat tightened. She didn't believe in promises. She didn't believe in mercy. But somehow she believed him. She had to. Because for the first time in her life, someone wasn't looking at her with ridicule or disgust. Gideon Ironwood looked at her as though she were a person deserving of warmth, of protection, of basic dignity. He rose to his full height and extended a hand. "Come," he said, "you're leaving this place." And even though her legs trembled, even though fear clawed at her ribs, Winnie put her hand in his, because staying meant death, and going with him, this stranger with frost in his eyes and warmth in his hands, felt like the first breath of life she'd had in months. The snow deepened as they left Ironwood behind. What had been a pale dusting in town quickly thickened into a white, untouched blanket that muffled the world into silence. Gideon walked beside Winnie, one steady hand always hovering near her elbow, not touching unless she stumbled, but ready, prepared, attentive. His horse pulled a small supply sled behind them, its harness bells the only sound cutting through the cold air. Winnie hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. Her breath came out in small white clouds, each one trembling from the sharp burn of the wind. Gideon's coat swallowed her completely, hanging to her knees, wrapping around her like a private shelter. "Can you keep walking?" Gideon finally asked, his voice deep and low enough that the cold seemed to soften around it. Winnie nodded, though her legs shook beneath her. I can." He didn't argue, but he slowed his pace, adjusting to her shorter stride without making her feel weak. That small thoughtfulness nearly undid her. Men in town had only ever moved faster to make her struggle, to laugh when she couldn't keep up. Yet this stranger, dangerous, scarred, feared, walked as though her pace was the only one that mattered. Halfway up the narrow path, her foot caught a rock hidden beneath the snow. She pitched forward with a soft gasp. Gideon caught her before she hit the ground. His arm came around her waist with silent precision, strong enough to lift her fully off her feet if he wanted to. "You're trembling," he murmured. "I'm fine," she whispered, mortified. "You're freezing." "I said I'm fine." Gideon tilted his head, studying her. Those winter-gray eyes saw through her like smoke. She felt naked under that gaze, yet not judged, not mocked, simply seen. Without a word, he crouched and tapped his shoulder. "Climb on." Winnie blinked. "What?" "You heard me. It's steep from here and your feet are torn. You won't make it without collapsing." Humiliation flooded her cheeks. "I'm too heavy." His brows lowered, not in anger, but disbelief. "Who told you that?" She looked away. "Everyone." Gideon grunted softly, something between dismissive and protective. "Then let me be the first to tell you they're idiots. Get on." She hesitated. Her dignity had already been stripped in front of 300 people that morning. Did she have to lose this too? But her legs were shaking hard. And Gideon, he wasn't offering. He was promising, as though carrying her was not a burden, but an inevitability. With a breath that tasted like surrender, she climbed onto his back. Gideon rose easily, gripping her thighs for balance. She felt lifted, her feet dangling, her body secured against broad shoulders and solid strength. The warmth of him stunned her. He carried heat like a forged stone, radiating through his coat, straight into her bones. "You're light," he said simply, starting up the path. She almost laughed. Bitterness, disbelief, and aching hope twisting inside her. No one had ever said those words, not even in mockery, never in gentleness. "You don't have to lie," she said quietly. "I don't lie," Gideon replied, "especially not about things like this." Silence settled over them again, but it wasn't harsh or cold. It was comfortable, the kind of silence that existed only with someone who didn't demand anything from her. After several minutes, she spoke again, voice small. Why did you buy me?" Gideon didn't stop walking, didn't even shift, but his voice dipped into something deeper, quieter. "Because no one else would," he said, "and because they were hurting you." Tears stung behind Winnie's eyes. She pressed her cheek to the back of his shoulder. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I saw a woman terrified and trying to stand tall anyway. I saw bruises that shouldn't be there. I saw a crowd laughing at someone who didn't deserve it." His jaw tightened. She felt the motion against her cheek. "And I saw a debt that should never have been forced onto the shoulders of a daughter." Winnie's breath caught. You knew my father?" "No," Gideon said, "but I know what loss looks like." Something heavy filled the air then, something unspoken but deeply felt. Grief recognized grief. Pain recognized pain. Winnie swallowed. "I'm sorry." Gideon grunted softly, the closest thing to acceptance she'd heard. They reached a bend in the mountain trail, overlooking a vast sweep of forest below. The horizon glowed with the fading light of late afternoon, painting the world in streaks of pink and cold gold. Winnie whispered, "It's beautiful." Gideon shifted just enough to glance over his shoulder at her. "It will be your home soon." The words echoed inside her chest. Your home, not a cage, not a debt, not labor. Home. They climbed the final stretch, and Winnie saw it. Gideon's cabin. It stood at the edge of a cliff, timber walls tall and solid, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing warmly through the dusk. A garden sat dormant under snow, a woodpile stacked neatly by the shed, and a small barn sheltered a pair of horses. He didn't live like a savage, as the town whispered. He lived like a man who built everything with his own hands. Gideon knelt, letting her slide off his back. "You'll be safe here," he said simply. Winnie looked at the cabin, at the smoke, the warmth, the promise of something gentler than anything she'd known. Then she looked at him. "Thank you," she whispered. Gideon didn't smile, but his eyes softened in a way she suspected very few people had ever seen. "Let's get you inside," he said. "You're shaking." The warmth inside Gideon Ironwood's cabin wrapped around Winnie like a blanket the moment he opened the door. After hours of freezing wind and the sting of snow cutting against her skin, the sudden heat made her knees buckle. She steadied herself on the doorframe, shivering uncontrollably as her body tried to adjust. Gideon watched her quietly before stepping ahead and lighting 2 more oil lamps. The soft golden glow revealed a space that felt nothing like the rumors about him. The cabin was large and meticulously built. Thick timber walls, a high raftered ceiling, and a broad stone hearth where a fire roared and snapped. A bearskin rug lay before the flames, and thick wool blankets were stacked neatly in a chest. Everything smelled of pine, smoke, and something warm and masculine. It felt safe. Winnie rubbed her arms through his oversized coat, unsure if she was allowed to step farther in. "Come here," Gideon said, not unkindly, but firmly enough to leave no room for hesitation. She followed him to the hearth, exhausted, trembling from cold, hunger, and fear of the unknown. Gideon turned to face her fully, eyes sharp but not cruel. Then the words came, low and direct. "Take off those rags." Winnie froze, her breath lodged in her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself instinctively, stepping back as shame and panic surged in her veins. "No, please," she whispered. "Please don't make me. I'll work. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't." Gideon's brow furrowed, confusion flickering quickly into realization. He exhaled, slowly, controlled, before crouching so he was eye level with her, not looming, not threatening, just there. "Winnie," he said quietly, "I'm not asking you to undress for me." Her lips trembled. "But you said—" "I said to take them off because they're soaked through, filthy, and tearing your skin apart." His gaze swept down her clothing, mud-stained, ripped, stiff with dried blood. "If you keep wearing them, you'll get sick, or worse." Her face burned with humiliation as she tried to process his meaning. Gideon kept speaking, voice deep but gentler now, as if afraid she might break. "I would never force myself on you," he said. "Not now, not ever." Winnie swallowed, her heart squeezing painfully. "Then, what do you want me to do?" Gideon stood and nodded toward a door beside the hearth. "There's a washroom. I already brought in water earlier today. It should still be warm." He picked up 3 buckets and stepped outside, returning moments later with fresh hot water from a heated barrel near the back of the cabin. He poured all of it into a wooden tub. Steam rose. "You're freezing," he said. "You need to bathe. Get warm. Clean your wounds." He walked to a chest and pulled out a folded bundle of soft wool, a dress, a fresh linen shift, thick socks, a shawl. He set them on a chair beside the tub. "These are clean. They're yours now." Winnie stared at the clothing as tears blurred her vision. No one had ever given her new clothes. Not even her father. Everything she'd ever worn had been used, patched, or discarded by others. She wiped at her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Gideon turned his head slightly. "For what?" "For misunderstanding." "You didn't misunderstand," Gideon said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "You reacted the way any woman would after what they did to you." He stepped toward the door and placed a hand on the wooden frame. "I'll be outside. The moment you call, I'll come." He met her gaze, steady, unwavering. "No harm will ever touch you in this cabin. Not from me, not from anyone." Then he was gone. The door closed behind him. Winnie pressed her hands against her face, sinking to her knees beside the tub as silent sobs shook her. Relief, fear, gratitude. She couldn't separate them. All she could think was, "He didn't want to hurt me. He wanted to help me." It felt impossible. She wiped her face again, forced herself to stand, and slowly peeled off the ruined dress and undergarments. The fabric clung stubbornly to her wounds, but once she managed to step out of them, she stood trembling at the edge of the steaming water. Her bruises bloomed purple and yellow across her arms and ribs. Scratches and lash marks ran down her back. She covered her stomach reflexively, ashamed, even alone. But then she remembered Gideon's voice. "You're safe here." She stepped into the tub. The heat wrapped around her instantly, settling deep into her bones. She sank into the water until it touched her shoulders, closing her eyes as pain and dirt soaked away into the rising steam. For the first time in months, she breathed without fear. At some point, she realized Gideon had set a bar of handmade soap on a stool beside her, along with a clean cloth and a small bottle of something that smelled faintly of lavender and pine. She used them slowly, carefully, savoring the simple act of feeling clean. By the time she stepped out and wrapped herself in the linen shift and wool dress, she felt lighter, still scared, still unsure, but no longer filthy, freezing, or bleeding. She opened the door. Gideon stood immediately, as if he'd been listening for the slightest sound. He took her in with one glance, her clean hair, her warm dress, her pinkened cheeks, and something unreadable softened his hard features. "Better?" he asked. Winnie nodded. "Yes." He approached her slowly, making sure she saw every step so she wouldn't startle. He reached out, not touching her skin, only lifting her hand by the sleeve so he could see the wrapped wounds beneath. "You did well," he murmured, "but some cuts still need salve." She didn't flinch this time when he led her to the hearth. He knelt beside her again, carefully pulling back the dress just enough to apply ointment to her ribs and the cut at her hip. His hands were warm, steady, patient. Not once did he touch her in a way that felt wrong. Winnie whispered, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Gideon paused, his hand hovering above a bruise. He didn't look at her when he answered, "Because someone should have been." Silence thickened between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, meaningful. After finishing, he helped her stand and nodded toward the broad bed in the corner. "You'll sleep there," he said. "I'll take the cot by the door. No argument." Winnie opened her mouth, then closed it. He was giving her a bed, warmth, safety, and dignity. She could only nod. "Thank you," she whispered. Gideon met her eyes. For the first time, she saw something behind the ice-gray surface, something wounded, familiar. "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "Just rest." She walked to the bed, climbed in, and slipped beneath the heavy quilts. She watched him take his cot by the door, sitting with his back against the wall like a sentry, protecting her. Long after she closed her eyes, she listened to the sound of his quiet breathing. For the first time since her father died, she slept without fear. Morning came softly to Devil's Peak. Thin golden light slipped through the cabin windows, warming the wooden floorboards and casting gentle patterns over the quilts. Winnie woke slowly, blinking at the ceiling above her, the first gentle awakening she'd had in months. No chains, no shouting, no cold stone floor, just warmth, safety, the faint smell of pine smoke, and silence. She turned her head. Gideon was already awake. He sat on a stool beside the fire, sharpening a hunting knife with long, steady strokes. The metal whispered against the whetstone, a low, rhythmic sound that might have frightened her yesterday. Today, somehow, it didn't. When he noticed she was awake, he didn't speak right away. He simply watched her with those gray eyes, cool, unreadable, but lacking hostility. "You slept," he finally said. Winnie pushed herself up slowly. "I did." "You needed it." She swallowed, nerves fluttering in her chest. She had questions. Too many. But she didn't know which to ask first. Gideon set the knife aside. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "about last night, about why I brought you here." Her stomach tightened. "You already told me it was because of your sister." "That's part of it." His voice dropped, deep as distant thunder. "But it's not the whole truth." He stood and walked to a cabinet near the window. From it, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, thin, worn at the edges, the kind of thing kept and handled too many times. He held it out. Winnie took it slowly. When she unfolded it, the breath caught in her throat. It was a wanted poster. Her name, her father's name, her family's forge, Hawthorne and Sons, stamped in black ink. Accusation, defaulted debt against the Ashford Bank. Her blood ran cold. My father didn't commit any crime. He fell behind. He was sick. He tried to pay. I know." Gideon's voice was low, steady. "Your father wasn't the criminal." Winnie looked up at him, confused and trembling. "Then why did they—" Gideon knelt in front of her. "Because Cornelius Ashford is more than a banker." His jaw clenched. "He's part of a ring of men who use the debt laws to enslave women, widows, orphans, anyone vulnerable." The room spun. No, no, she must have misheard. But Gideon continued. 3 years ago, he sent a man to fetch someone from Devil's Peak. A girl with the same soft features you have, the same hair color. They said she owed money. They said she needed to work it off. Winnie's breath caught painfully. "Your sister." Gideon nodded once. "They broke her, used her, sold her, until she didn't survive it." Tears filled Winnie's eyes instantly. "Gideon, I'm so sorry." His expression hardened, not at her, but at memories carved deep into him. "I swore I'd never let another woman fall into their hands. And when I saw you standing on that auction block, I saw her all over again." Winnie covered her face, shoulders shaking. She hadn't known any of this. She'd thought she was simply a burden, a debtor, a failure. But she was prey, marked, targeted, just like his sister. Gideon rose and moved toward the window. "There's more." Winnie wiped her eyes. What else?" He pulled back the curtain just an inch, enough for her to see a thin line of smoke rising in the far distance down the mountain trail. "They're coming." Her heart dropped. "Who?" "Cornelius Ashford and his men. They won't let a debt go. Not when they can profit from it. They'll want you back, under their control." Winnie's voice broke. But I'm free. You paid all the money." "Men like him don't care about the law. They care about ownership. And he thinks he still owns you." The room seemed to shrink around her. "What will he do if he finds me?" Gideon looked at her then, really looked, and something fierce flared behind his eyes. "He won't." "Gideon!" "I said," he repeated, voice like iron, "he won't." There was no bravado in his tone, no shouting, no chest beating, just certainty. The certainty of a man who had lost once, brutally, and would die before losing again. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breathing. "What should I do?" "You stay inside, you stay quiet, and you stay close to the fire to keep warm." Gideon grabbed his rifle and checked the chamber. "I'll handle the rest." Fear struck her deep and sharp. "Gideon, he has deputies, hired guns. He has power. You can't fight them alone." "I've fought worse alone." He pulled on his coat. "But I won't let them near you." Before she could protest, he crossed the room and gently touched her cheek. Not possessive, not claiming, just reassuring. "Winnie," he said softly, "you're not a piece of debt. You're not a slave. You're a human being, and you're under my protection now." Her breath shook. Why are you doing all this for me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he brushed a stray curl from her temple and looked into her eyes with a strange, quiet intensity. "Because you deserve someone who doesn't see you as a burden, someone who fights for you. And I'm not letting them take the first thing that's felt right in years." Warmth flooded her chest so suddenly it hurt. "Gideon," he stepped back, jaw set. "If anything happens, you hide behind the woodpile in the back room. Don't come out until I say." She nodded, even though fear coiled tight in her stomach. Gideon opened the door. The wind roared in immediately, swirling snow around his boots. He looked back at her once more. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "I'll make damn sure of it." Then he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. Winnie stood in the center of the cabin, her heart pounding like a drum. Outside, somewhere down the mountain, smoke rose higher. The men who'd hurt her were coming, but this time She wasn't alone. This time, she had Gideon Ironwood. The first crack of a rifle echoing across the valley reached the cabin just after midday. Winnie jolted, dropping the spoon she'd been gripping so tightly her fingers had gone white. It clattered onto the table, loud in the thick silence. Her heart leapt painfully into her throat. She ran to the window. Snow fell in delicate curtains, but movement broke the white stillness. Dark silhouettes winding their way up the mountain trail. 6, no, 7 men. Horses snorting steam into the cold air. Shotguns glinting beneath their coats. And at the front, hunched on a black gelding, was Cornelius Ashford. Her blood turned to ice. They had come for her. The cabin door burst open a moment later. Gideon stepped in, a gust of wind and snow behind him, his coat dusted white, rifle slung across his broad back. "They're 2 ridges away," he said, voice low and calm. "We don't have long." Winnie's breath trembled. "Gideon, there are so many." "I know. You can't face all of them alone." Gideon walked to the wall, checking the ammunition laid out neatly on the shelf. Rounds lined with military precision, each one polished and placed exactly. Winnie realized then that fighting wasn't a possibility to him. It was certainty. He loaded 2 shells into the rifle with slow, controlled movements. "Winnie, listen to me." His voice softened in that way it did only with her. "I don't want to fight unless I choose one, but those men don't come for peace." She swallowed hard. "If they take me, they won't." She repeated the words in her head, but fear still coiled in her stomach. "Cornelius will twist the law. He always does." Gideon's jaw clenched. Let him try. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder, thudding through the ground and up through Winnie's feet. She grabbed Gideon's arm. "Promise me you won't get killed for me." He turned to her slowly, and for the first time since last night, maybe for the first time in years, his expression cracked, not with fear, not with anger, with tenderness. "I'm not doing this just for you," he said quietly. "I'm doing it because I refuse to let men like him keep hurting women like you." Winnie's eyes burned. "But you can't stand against all of them." Gideon lifted her chin with one finger, steady, sure. "I've stood alone against worse." Her breath shook. "I want to help." "No." He turned away. "You hide, behind the woodpile, just like I said." But something inside her rebelled. Her whole life she had been silent, obedient, a girl who learned to shrink herself so others didn't feel bothered by her existence. She wasn't going to shrink anymore, not when Gideon was willing to fight for her, not when men who'd abused and humiliated her were riding up the mountain, ready to drag her back into hell. She stepped in front of him. "Gideon, I can't hide while you bleed for me." His eyes flashed, startled, almost pained. "Winnie, no," she whispered fiercely. "You said I mattered. You said someone should have protected your sister." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Let me protect myself. Let me stand with you, just this once." Gideon inhaled sharply, fighting something unnamed. Respect, fear, hope. Finally, he dropped his gaze to the floor. "You're braver than you know," he said softly, "but they won't hesitate to hurt you." "I know," she whispered, "but I won't let them take me alive." Those words hit him like a blow. Before he could argue, the horses thundered into the clearing. Gideon moved first. He grabbed Winnie's hand, large and calloused, closing around small and trembling, and pulled her toward the hearth. "You stay behind me," he growled, "no matter what." She nodded. Outside, Cornelius Ashford's voice cut through the snow like a blade. Ironwood, bring out the girl. She belongs to me. Gideon strode to the door, rifle in hand, and threw it open. Cold wind tore into the cabin, but Winnie didn't feel it. She saw only the man standing like a shadow made flesh, broad, unmoving, carved from stone. Gideon stepped forward onto the porch. She belongs to no one. Cornelius sneered from atop his horse. She's in debt, and debt is ownership. Not anymore, Gideon replied, his voice like iron. I paid it. Cornelius chuckled darkly. You paid a number on paper, but I decide when a debt is cleared. You decide nothing here. Cornelius's smile twisted. Step aside, Ironwood, or we'll come take her. Gideon lifted the rifle slowly, deliberately. You can try. A hush fell over the clearing. Snow drifted. Hooves stamped. 7 men gripped their weapons, fear flickering beneath bravado. And behind Gideon, Winnie stepped forward, not hiding, not cowering, placing her trembling hand on the back of his coat. Cornelius's eyes widened. Girl, get over here. Winnie's voice was soft, but unbroken. No. Cornelius's face purpled with rage. You think that mountain savage can protect you? Gideon answered before she could. She doesn't think it, he said. She knows it. The air snapped taut. Hands shifted on triggers. Cold spilled across the world. Then Gideon's voice cut through the silence, low and lethal. Last chance. Turn around. Go home. Cornelius smirked. Boys. But he never finished, because Gideon Ironwood was already moving. Gideon moved first. Not with the wild charge Cornelius expected, not with the reckless fury of a man cornered. He moved like a soldier who had survived too many battlefields to count. One smooth pivot, one leveled aim, one warning shot fired into the snow at Cornelius's feet. The blast cracked through the mountain like lightning. Horses reared, men shouted, snow exploded upward in a white spray. Cornelius yanked on the reins, barely holding on. Are you insane? Gideon didn't blink. Second shot won't be a warning. The hired guns swallowed hard, glancing at one another. They expected a brute, a savage, not a professional marksman with perfect control. Gideon lifted the rifle again, slow and deliberate. That was when the tallest deputy, a broad man with a scar running across his forehead, lurched forward, shotgun raised. She's property of the Ashford Bank, he growled. Move aside or... Winnie stepped out from behind the door. Her voice shook, but it carried. I'm not property, not anymore. Every head turned. Even Gideon stiffened. Cornelius's face twisted. Girl, you dare speak to me? After the mercy I've shown? Winnie swallowed her fear and raised her chin. You've never shown anyone mercy. You killed my father with debt he never deserved. You beat me when I couldn't work fast enough. And you dragged me into the street like an animal. Her voice cracked. But you don't own me? The deputy laughed harshly. Ironwood's filled her head with nonsense. Winnie shook her head. No, he just showed me what kindness feels like. For the first time in my life. Cornelius sneered. What a touching fantasy, boys. His order was cut short by a sound that froze the breath in everyone's lungs. Gideon cocked the rifle, not quickly, not loudly, slow, precise, a promise. Cornelius's men shuddered at the quiet finality of it. You come up this porch, Gideon said, and you won't make it back down. The scarred deputy spat. You won't shoot all of us. Gideon's gaze sliced into him. Try me. A beat of silence. 2, 3. Then the deputy lunged. But he never managed a single step. Gideon fired, hitting the man's shotgun square in the barrel. The weapon flew from his hands, spinning through the air and landing in the snow, useless and smoking. The man stared at his empty hands, stunned. He shot my gun. Cornelius blanched. He had expected a brute. He had found a sniper. Gideon took one step forward on the porch. The air around him felt charged, like the split second before a storm. "I've warned you," he growled. "Leave!" Cornelius looked at his men. None dared advance. Their earlier bravado melted in the cold. One finally muttered, "Ain't worth dying for, boss." Another nodded. "Not against him." Cornelius cursed, but he knew a losing fight when he saw one. No amount of rage could change the fact that 7 half-trained men were no match for Gideon Ironwood. "Fine." Cornelius pulled his coat tighter and turned his horse. "This isn't over." Gideon didn't lower his rifle. "It is for today." Cornelius jabbed his heels into his horse, riding away with the others scrambling behind him. Snow swallowed them quickly, their angry shouts fading into the wind. When silence finally returned to Devil's Peak, Gideon didn't move. Not until the last hoofbeat was gone. Only then did he exhale, lowering the rifle, shoulders sagging with exhausted restraint. Winnie stepped toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "You protected me." Gideon turned, meeting her eyes, not with triumph or pride, but with quiet, fierce relief. "You stood with me," he said. Snow fell softly around them. Inside the cabin behind him, the fire crackled. And for the first time since arriving on the mountain, Winnie stepped into Gideon's arms without fear. Night fell gently over Devil's Peak, muting the last traces of Cornelius's retreat. Wind softened. Snow settled. The mountains, ancient and indifferent, folded the little cabin in a blanket of deep winter silence. Gideon set the rifle near the door and let out a breath he'd been holding since the moment he heard horses below the ridge. It came out rough, weary. Winnie stood in the doorway, watching him. Not the fear-stricken girl who had arrived days before, but someone steadier, braver, carved from everything she had endured and everything she had survived. "You're hurt," she whispered. Gideon shook his head. "No, just tired." She walked toward him anyway, carefully, as though approaching something sacred. Her small hands rose, fingertips brushing the fabric on his upper arm, checking for wounds. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. His voice lowered. "You shouldn't have come outside. They could have—" "They didn't," she said softly, "because you were there." He swallowed hard, jaw tightening. "I don't want you risking yourself for me." Her eyes flickered up. "You risked everything for me." The words landed between them like a spark. Gideon looked away, one hand braced on the table as if grounding himself. "I wasn't going to let them take you," he said quietly. "Not back to that man, not back to that life." Winnie's breath hitched, not with fear this time, but something warm, something unfamiliar. "Then where do I belong?" Gideon turned to her fully. The fire behind her lit her hair like copper, softened the roundness of her cheeks, made her eyes glow. He saw strength where the town saw weakness. He saw softness where the world saw flaw. He saw the girl he carried through deep snow simply because he could not bear to see her hurt. He held her gaze as though steadying something fragile. "You belong somewhere you're safe." His voice roughened. "If you choose it, you belong here." Winnie's lips parted in a small, trembling breath. "Here? With you?" He nodded once. Not a command, not a demand. A quiet offering. Winnie stepped closer until her forehead nearly touched his chest. "No one has ever wanted me before," she whispered. Gideon's voice dropped into something almost unsteady. Then they were blind. Her hand lifted, brushing the edge of his shirt. Gideon, what happens now? He took her hand, slowly, carefully, like it was something precious, and wrapped it in his own. Now, he said, you rest, you heal, and tomorrow we start figuring out what a life looks like, together or apart. Only you get to decide that. Winnie's throat tightened. Only days ago she was chained on a stage, laughed at, traded like cattle. Tonight, someone was handing her freedom with both hands. Her eyes shimmered. I want to stay, if that's all right. Gideon didn't smile often, but he did then, small, warm, reverent. It's all right, he murmured. It's more than all right. The wind brushed against the cabin walls. The fire cracked, and in that quiet, gentle glow, Winnie leaned into Gideon's chest as though she had finally found the one place the world could no longer hurt her. He wrapped an arm around her, not claiming, not commanding, protecting, promising. You're safe here, he whispered. Winnie closed her eyes. For the first time, she breathed, I believe that. Some stories begin with chains, cold wind, and a crowd that refuses to see a person's worth, but they don't have to end there. Winnie and Gideon remind us that sometimes the world misjudges us, abandons us, laughs at us, until one person chooses to look deeper and everything changes. Thank you for listening tonight. Before you go, tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now? Your comments and your presence mean more than you know. And if you're someone who still believes love can grow in the unlikeliest places, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you.